toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the messenger, the spirit of guidance.
Well, welcome everyone. This is the 8th in our series of 10 classes on becoming a human divine being. And our theme for tonight is awakening in life. So those of you who have been with us from the beginning, we had a series of 6 classes called Birthing Your Resurrection Body, and then another series of 6 called Living in Your Resurrection Body, and this series of 10 classes, Becoming a Human Divine Being. And we want spirituality to be something that is going to be practical and meaningful in our day-to-day life, not something that makes us otherworldly or spacey or having difficulty functioning. If anything, we want it to make us much more capable of dealing with all the challenges that there are in the world, especially right now. So what does it mean to be a human divine being in the thick of things, in the midst of life? Well, one important part of that is recognizing when we've been pulled out of that state of consciousness that I hope each of us at least briefly has had some experiences in along the way in this series, of that state of relational unity, of that feeling of interconnectedness with all that we're experiencing, of that feeling of being in a transformed world. So again, a reminder, when we say awakening in life, it's not awakening in a life somewhere otherworldly or somewhere beyond the world that we're in, but what's dramatically different is the world that we thought we were in was just a constriction and sometimes a distortion of the actual reality in which we do exist. And the problem has been our perspective, our vantage point, our identification with the world of our senses, and our identification with our thoughts and concepts about what we're experiencing, our identification with our emotions, and even our identification with our personality and our sense of ourself as just being the life that goes through time and space in this one physical incarnation. And certainly that's an important aspect of who we are, but that is the tiniest piece of who we actually are. So we've talked about experiencing multidimensional consciousness, and we've talked about in order to do that, we first have to be able to awaken our subtle senses. We have to develop the capacity to be able to access these subtle levels of reality that are all present right here, but we can think of them as different vibrational realms, much more subtle, that normally we don't have the capacity to experience. So the first step is to be able to experience those individually. And then the second step is to be able to experience those as a part of the unitive structure of our being, which exists on these many levels of reality.
So one way that we spoke about the many layers and realms has been harmonic perception. We spoke about Tawil was a method of opening, we said, some things that we might see in the material world or the world of the senses, so such that they tell the story of their evolution into this material plane. But another way of looking at it is it really opens up all these other levels and gives us an invitation to experience. And so the harmonic perception is, again, the invitation to experience many of these realms at the same time. I've thought of an example of this in, some of us have the Spiritual Body book, which spoke of the Zoroastrian tradition, and we learned some from the Zoroastrian tradition about Sventa Almighty and the angels, and then we had our experiences with the sheikhs in the Sheikhi school, which was about 1,000 years ago, including Ibn Arabi and all the changes that happened in that time based on what they were finding out about the Zoroastrian tradition. And then you could just come to the time that we are mostly manifest, or thinking of ourselves, our physical being existing in this realm. And the beauty of the Ta wheel and our participation in the imaginal faculty is that we can open a place within us, a surface area we've spoke about before, that can open and open, so that now we have room for many more realms than we spoke of or ever experienced before. And this is the arena, this is the place on which we can do the spiritual practice, rather than thinking that we're one little person in this little bit limited perspective in this limited body. You want to take it from there?
Yeah. So I've talked many times about believing that every situation, every interaction, every relationship, no matter how difficult, is potentially a portal to the sacred. And so what happens when we get into a state of constriction, not in the good sense. Last time we talked about how constriction can be something very good. It's a focalization from our finite state in our relationship with the divine, so that information can come through in both directions. Light can come through in a coherent form in both directions. But what happens when we're in a constricted state, when we've forgotten the true nature of who we are? Or perhaps we realize it. So what are the signs? Well, one is when we're in a situation when we catch ourselves reacting to something, and we feel a polarization, we feel a dualistic relationship. There's us and there's whoever or whatever else is involved in this. And along with that, there's the thoughts that go through our head. And sometimes those are thoughts that don't even come from the present. Those are thoughts that come from our conditioning, things that we've been told along the way, or we've identified with belief systems that others have told us. So it's a reactive state of experience that is a far cry from being in the state of being a human divine being. So what's the remedy for this? Well, the remedy, first part of the remedy, is remembering what our true nature is, even if temporarily we don't know how to pull ourselves out of the place that we're stuck in. And so most of you are familiar with the term zikr. Zikr is the essential practice of the Sufis, and it literally means remembrance. Usually when we hear that word remembrance, we're thinking about we're remembering something that's been, something from the past. But in actuality, this is a remembrance of how we are and how we are becoming. It's a remembrance of this. Rabani Ra talked about harmonic perception, and we've also talked about the idea of harmonic relationship, of being in a harmonic relationship with whatever it is that we're experiencing, such that there's a circulation of light in both directions, such that there is something that opens up from the relationship and the interaction, rather than something that shuts down and separates. And along the way, we've shared many, many different practices, and they're all recorded on the previous videos that you can go back and refer to. And we're going to continue to share some practices. We're going to do some tonight. And it's very helpful to work with practices such as these on a regular basis, because we are, first of all, trying to undo a conditioning or a programming. What is that? We're trying to undo our habitual way of perceiving reality that is very limited. And it's such a convincing thing, because everybody else tends to perceive reality in that limited way too. So there's not even the question that usually arises that there could be something else, or that there is something else much better than the way that we're seeing things.
Okay. And I loved hearing you talk about this harmonic relationship, and I just was thinking that's a good way of thinking about what I was going to be bringing tonight. Mostly was the relationship with the divine, and really an emphasis on this relationship. And we'll be speaking about it in a different way than you may have ever thought of tonight. But I wanted to read something with you about this relationship and how it really changes so much from one epiphany to the next. But this is a pretty high epiphany spoken of from Ibn Arabi in Alone with the Alone. When you have entered into my paradise, you have entered into yourself, your own soul, and you know yourself with another knowledge different from that which you had when you knew your Lord by the knowledge you had of yourself. For now you know him, and it is through him that you know yourself. So the difference, I'm going to say it again and think about what the difference is between these two. First, you know yourself. You know your Lord by the knowledge you had of yourself. So you're kind of going from what you know about your own being and qualities in humans and work it up and say, well, I guess God is something like that, only more so, or something like that. Kind of putting together little bits of knowledge to come to this accumulative state. The other is, now you know him, and it is through him that you know yourself. So what are we doing? We are unfolding that love that we have all the way. And when we were speaking about that surface area, that mirror that we have within us, in the, you call it the barzakh, or the part of us that is really the active, imagining, moving part that can create and transform. So in that mirror, we see the divine, and we're thinking of it as not way up somewhere, hard to relate to, but that closest beloved, that one that touches us so deeply in our hearts. And by knowing that being, then we know ourselves. What a difference that kind of relationship is. But I see we say awakening in life, and we think of it as, okay, just the normal situations, the material realm, but we're really speaking of an incredible drama of life, an incredible, what did we call that, of the soul? We say the allegory of the soul. It is so much greater than what we thought our life was. It is described also by the Sufis as the distance between our own soul and the material realm in which we think that we're living. This is our real world, and that's the barzakh also, the place where our energies can be used in the ways that our ishq, our desire, allows them to unfold, and in the relationship with the greatest who is also learning along with us. So it is a great story, and then we look at it with really the eyes of a psychologist right here with us that can help us with adjusting to the different things that come up when we try to work this relationship.
And we've also talked about alchemy, and we've talked about how normally the alchemical process is thought of as being our limited self undergoes a series of transformations, going through different stages to become something different at the end, to become illuminated, to become awakened, and so on. And from one vantage point, you might say, well, that seems accurate. But on a much deeper level, in actuality, what is going on is the whole alchemical process is a process of alchemical transformation of our human divine relationship. And in this process of transformation, it is both sides that are transformed. It is both sides that are evolved, and one couldn't have any significant change without the participation and involvement of the other, without the harmonic relationship between those two sides. So again, let's bring this back to our day-to-day life. What is helpful in this? Well, one is to maintain, we could say, an integrity of our being, or a coherence of our being. As we come to awaken, we can start to identify more and more with the way that we actually are. And it's like waking up from a dream, and sometimes we fall back asleep. But we remember how we really are, and we kind of just reorganize ourselves around that sense of self in the way we go about our business during the day, in the way we go about relating to others, and even in our perception of situations. So back to the idea that everything is a portal to the sacred. Well, what enables that, us to go through that portal and enter to that realm of sacredness? It could be by means of any number of things, and it could be by means of any one of the divine qualities, such as compassion, such as love, such as beauty, such as wisdom, such as truth, such as power, such as majesty, and so on. But it's kind of the, I call it the currency, it's the medium that enables this relationship to blossom and not only come into a state of harmonic relationship, but to evolve beyond that. Because whenever we are in this state of harmonic relationship with someone or something else, there's this twofold light process that's going on. There's the light that arises from us, and there's the light that arises from what we are in relationship with. And in our usual thinking, linear thinking, we think, well, light's coming from me to, let's say, that person, and light's coming from that person to me. But it's not, that's not actually what's going on. It's because we are interconnected with everything, the light of who we are is suffusing everything, including that other person, and vice versa. And now every part of the light of our being and every part of the light of that other person's being is affecting the light of the other. And there's this ongoing blossoming of light. So something new arises from this that wasn't there before. What's the result of that? Well, on a basic level, it's going to transform how we feel about the particular circumstance we're in. That does not mean that an external observer is going to see anything different on the other person's end. We can't magically think, okay, because I'm in this state of harmonic relationship, all of a sudden they're going to be very nice and have a eureka moment. You might not see anything different in them, but it's opening up a space of possibilities. It's enabling you and whatever you're in relationship with to be in a space that is much richer than the constricted space that you were in, and it's now making something available that wasn't available before. Maybe it's just germinating a seed or catalyzing a seed in that other person's being that 20 years from now is going to blossom. We can't really be attached to that. But that way of being, which can be applied to whatever it is that we're doing, it's like we are allowing the light of who we really are to blossom forth in the midst of whatever situation that we find ourselves in, no matter how dark that it might seem.
I love the feeling of that. I get it. So the space of possibilities is really, unfolding new territory, new space. The space itself then kind of draws the archetypes. I can just feel that, the energy of those, because now there's more space created. And it's not even the way that we think about as new space being created, because it's more like dimensionality and depth and connectiveness, like connective tissue between things. And it's like mystics trying to imagine what science has been talking about, which is a wonderful interface that we're working with right here. But you know how that is when you are, let's say, with someone who has unfolded places like this, and it's like answers come to you that you didn't even ask the question, and you're healed in different kinds of ways, or they are healed because of your presence there. So it's a real situation, and one that we can include in our imaginal functionality, something that we can work with. And again, here, this is the world we live in, the world in which these possibilities can happen.
And Pierre Balayat would always talk about a practical way to work with the divine qualities. And he would say, well, what quality do you feel that you're being challenged in? That if you had more of this quality, it would help you with a particular problem area in your life. And so we could take as a concentration working with that quality as a practice, as a wazifa, but also working with it in our day-to-day life. And there'll be no shortage of opportunities for you to practice bringing forth that quality that you choose in many situations that may arise. And so I would suggest that you try this out as a practice. I'm sure each of you can think of at least one quality that if you could just have much more of that quality present in your being, it would make it easier for you to deal with and then fill in the blank. And the blank might be the pandemic, it might be a difficult situation at work, or a relationship situation, or a health situation, or whatever it might be. And then allow yourself to have that quality be the means of establishing harmonic relationship with a particular issue, and see what happens when you allow that quality to be the way that you allowed the light to circulate back and forth in the midst of that.
Okay, so the practice that we're going to be doing for this section is very similar to the compassionate divine practice, one of the three that we recommended that people use during this series. But it'll be a little bit different this time, in that, wonderfully enough, what you just mentioned was part of what I was thinking of, in that we're going to be feeling a circulation of energy between ourselves and what we consider either our personal Lord, our angel, the divine in its particular form for you. So imagine that part of your being, and we're getting a little bit of separation between us here so that we can feel a circulation. So you feel a circulation, an actual circle going between that being and yourself, and back again to that being. And as you're breathing just the regular breath that you usually breathe, say breathing in and out, but seeing this circulation of energy and essences and light going from one to the other. And as you breathe in, it does accentuate and pull in that, increase the dynamism of that light, the speed of rotation of that light and energy between the both of you. But it is a continual flow from one to the other. You can think of it as coming from perhaps your left side, and then around to your right and to the divine being, and then around. And continue that movement. So you close your eyes and are just feeling this rotation that is always happening. And now in your being, feel that instead of having hard surfaces of your body here, there's much more gauzy feeling, so that the light is definitely penetrating through in all different wazaif qualities are also circulating. You allow the circulating as you breathe. You inhale, you feel it coming from the left, and then exhaling to the right and around. Now I'd like you to think from the perspective of the divine being. So now you're on the other side as far as you were seeing before, but feeling the circulation between you. And there are many more levels to it now, as if you imagine almost a storm, like a hurricane or even a tornado, but a kind and beautiful and powerful and full and godlike hurricane. All the time, this could, like your wings in what Pirzia was having us work with. This is actually an element of our deeper self that we could imagine during the day, all the time, underneath whatever else is going on, and kind of relax into it now. Certainly slow it down and allow feel as if it could be a nurturing of your own being. Now feel especially the compassionate nature of this divine being and your compassionate nature, feeling being extended to this being. Feel it working into all of your body, the deeper parts of your physical body, parts of your dream body, anything that has a need or would care to share with this divine one. And at some point you realize it doesn't even need to be in one direction here, like we've been turning the energy one way around. It can be in all the directions at the same time. Like this wide embrace. And we realize that we actually are sharing so much with the divine. Our lives, our difficult places that are being healed. That in this way, at least, there are no boundaries. And that it's possible to keep this kind of feeling in the backstage, you might say, a deeper part of our being, the same time is going on about our lives that, in which we do have separation. Think about how that could be. Circulation continuing to go on. At the same time, we have what we might call our spacesuits for the planet Earth. But that we're continually having an effect even in the divine, in the divine realms, to what is happening in this manifestation. Allowing this feeling to go through all your cells and all your energy. You don't have to be able to see all the dimensions in order to work with them. There's a part of us that knows, our heart knows. So let's allow this feeling to recede even deeper back into our backstage. We just are left with this feeling of invigoration and of support and belonging, compassion, community. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Be with us. Anything to add?
Yep. Sure. Oh, I'm gonna.
Did you click up there?
It's recording. Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the scriptures of Hinduism that some of you may be familiar with. And the central message of the Bhagavad Gita is to act without being attached to the fruit of your actions. So it's the act for the sake of the action and not being attached to the fruits. And so what came to me as we were preparing for this class, I think a deeper meaning of this means being open to outcomes far beyond anything that you might anticipate. Being in that cusp of the new creation that's born at every instant, which is guided by your desire, but which is continually open to revelation. So it's being open to a mutual process of discovery. The divine being is always seeking to know itself through us, and we're also seeking to know our true self through our relationship with any expression of the divine in any circumstance or situation that we encounter, whether it's an external one in our life, in the world, but also whether it's an internal one, an inner one, with connecting with what Ibn Arabi calls our personal Lord or our personal angel, the transcendent part of our being. If you remember that example, the Hazrat Inayat Khan, that our souls are like a ray from the divine central sun, and we're identified with one end of it, and the part that's coming from the sun beyond us is the transcendent or part of our being. And the part that's manifest we could think of as the human part of our being. And to the extent that we've opened up awareness of more and more levels on which we exist, then there's much more of ourself that we bring to that point of contact, that interface, that little gap that we said always has to be there in the barzakh for creation to take place. So this is constantly happening if we have the awareness to be able to perceive it in whatever is going on. We're always encountering something. And we can encounter something through a very separated state of consciousness, a dualistic state of consciousness, which we're all very familiar with. And perhaps you've had experiences of samadhi where you just totally merged and lost any sense of identity. Well, that's a unitive state of experience. I mean, beyond any personal identity. But in Sufism, we're wanting what's in the middle. We say towards the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty. And we don't say arriving at the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty. It's always toward. Why is it always toward? Because there's never an end to it. There's never an end to the unfoldment. There's never an end to the revelation that takes place. And we'll say it again and again, that revelation on one level seems like a revelation coming to us. We're going to do a meditation about this a little bit later, like Gabriel's passing a divine message to us, but it's a twofold process. Something is revealed to the divine through us in that particular circumstance. And if we're open to that, if we just remember that with practice, it becomes easier and easier very, very quickly to return to that much more expansive state of being, the way that we experience ourselves, the way that we experience the circumstance, and the way that we experience the world. We've talked before about what happens when subtle energy is connected with what Tiller calls ordinary reality, how now there's new possibilities that have opened. Well, there's a scientific explanation complete with mathematical equations beyond anything I can understand, but it's actually verifying a phenomena that we've all experienced when we are, at least for the time being, in a state like that, whether it's being in awe in nature. Every morning, Ravani Ra and I go and walk at the Oso wetlands, and most days, if it's not overcast, some of you may have seen them on Facebook, these unbelievable sunrises. I mean, it's like, what more evidence do you need about the wonders of creation coming through in so many different forms, and there's no end to the creativity of nature and how it's expressed. So we can be open to this, and when we are open to this, and when we allow ourselves to bring who we are right in the midst of whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, things will be dramatically transformed. We've talked early on in this series about the quantum shifts in understanding and consciousness that are necessary parts of the spiritual journey of awakening. We've talked about phenomena, the breakdown or the freeing ourselves from a previous state of functioning so we can open up to Baka, the transformation, what's arising, the new Makam, the new station, and that's an ongoing process. We'll be in a particular station in our lives, sometimes for an extended period of time, and oftentimes the signs that it's time to move on to a further stage of evolution are there when we're trying to hold on to the way that things have been and things start falling apart. And the more we try to hold on to the previous way of being, the more they fall apart, and we might go, well, I guess this is my karma. No, it's not your karma. This reminds me, I've shared the example at the office I used to work at that had a concrete parking lot underneath everything was on the second floor. And I came out one day and the start of a palm tree was growing right through the concrete. Impossible. No, there it is. I mean, nothing was going to keep that growth from coming towards the light. Nothing is going to keep our soul from evolving into a higher state of being. And it's only when we get in the way of ourselves that things get very rocky.
So again, in preparation for this class, we have many conversations. And in the conversation he's speaking about here, I took some little notes. In what we decided was, what is true is that you are in a deep and abiding relationship with the divine. and all the ways in which the divine is manifested. Now we're speaking of that sunrise, we're speaking of all the animals that we see, so in manifestation, but we're also speaking about that one that we had a relationship in this meditation we had a little bit earlier, feeling that divine that is our personal Lord, you might say, that we have a deep and abiding relationship with all the ways that the divine is manifested, and the divine is awakening to the divine self through you in the midst of whatever situation that you are in. It's a further development of what we had said before about that the divine is affected by what is happening in manifestation. I mean, even in thinking about that it's all been created for the divine to realize love, and if things are separated a little bit, what would happen if this being that is created has free will? What would happen? Can this being find its way back to God? And how much can be loved? How much can love unfold? So the divine is awakening to all of the manifestation, and the most beautiful of all of it is when we can really open our hearts and accept God into the entire manifestation and realm from which we are. So it's like, in a way, looking at God's self, but looking into a being who has free will, but also the dubious, I guess you'd think of, ability to feel trapped, to feel abandoned, to feel all the depths of difficulties. But then God keeps watching to see, well, what is going to happen now? And it may be helping somehow, but mostly seeing what it is that can happen with this being that is in manifestation and feeling it so deeply. Can you imagine the feeling of God, feeling the depths of what is happening to some beings in the world right now? Of course it's transformative. We know that it is. So in the midst of all is happening to beings, the divine is learning. You expect the unexpected in what you're in your relationship. The possibilities are limitless. The point is the whole relationship. Just like what you said before about what the point of the whole thing was. It's not the fruits of it. It is actually the process. It is the relationship that is the transformative quality for everything associated with it. So what can we feel in this is a continual delight in knowing that what emerges in this moment is just what is needed. Azerbaijan was going to do a class, and I think it's coming up at some time, about what to do in the mystery. How do you relate to the mystery? And this is really what we're speaking about right here. I mean, it's a sacrament and it's a mystery. That is, there's no answer to what is happening next. We're looking at what's happening next in our country, perhaps. And it's way more than just that. And there is no answer to it, but there is a process to it. I don't think it's an accident that we are drawn to doing a class and evolving a class like this right now, in the midst of all the things that are happening, to pull together that which we can teach each other, to bring a light that has never been seen before, and to feel that we are always at this moment, this new birthing that is happening, no matter what stage in the process that we are in. If we are continually feeling ourselves in the relationship, that we are associated with everything that there is, and we open our hearts with all the possibilities that the divine has bestowed upon us. You know, it is an incredible moment that we are all living in.
So something I've been thinking about for many, many years is the variety of the texts of the scriptures of the world's religion, and historically the differences that have been there over time. So one of the oldest ones is the Upanishads, and much of what's in the Upanishads is about transcendence, is about the merging back with the divine being beyond existence. And then along comes the Judaism and the Old Testament and the nature of the relationship between humans and God. And so the God of the Old Testament oftentimes is jealous and wrathful and demanding of sacrifice and worship and smiting peoples that aren't in alignment with the divine plan. And then comes Christ, and we have the New Testament, the gospel, and the much more loving God, and the metaphor of the shepherd and the sheep. And then we have the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran, and Prophet Muhammad is said to be the seal of the prophets, which means that no longer after Muhammad was there a need for a prophet, no longer was there going to be a need for an intermediary between the human and God. And then we fast forward to the teachings of our time, and even the change in the invocation that recently has been approved, who form the embodiment of the messenger, as opposed to who form the embodiment of the master. And the idea of messenger, well, there have been many messengers that have come over time, Rama and Buddha and Krishna and Shiva and Christ and Moses and Muhammad and so on. But now, as we've talked a bit in this series, I think all of us collectively are the embodiment of the messenger, and to the extent that we've awakened is how much we are participating in that collective transmission of what comes through in that harmonic relationship that we have with each other, not just with beings manifest in the physical realm, but beings manifest on subtle levels of reality. So back to the scriptures that have been present over time, the history of humanity, we could think of these as God's and mankind's ongoing journal, like a description or a dialogue that has occurred at different states of evolution of human consciousness that have enabled different degrees of evolution of the relationship between the humans and the divine side of things, all the way up to the present time, where now there's modes of thinking that have been brought about by science, of evidence that support what the mystics have been saying, that everything is totally interconnected, everything is entangled, everything affects everything else, that time is not unidirectional, past, present, future, but the present and future can affect things that from our vantage point are in the past. And so as we've said before, this alchemical transformation is a transformation of the human divine relationship, both in ourselves as individuals, but collectively through humanity in relationship with the divine. Hazrat Inayat Khan, as many of you know, said something very beautiful. He said there's but one sacred scripture, and the leaves of the trees are the pages of the scripture. And obviously he's talking metaphorically, but I think he's saying something that I believe very deeply, that life itself is a living scripture. And it's not just a scripture we think we pick up a book and read it. We are living in that scripture, and we are part of the sacredness of that scripture when we awaken to the true nature of who we are. And we enable, I've mentioned this before, I don't think sacredness is some quality existing in the divine that we just kind of get in tune with it and now we can experience it. I think sacredness is what arises when we enter into this harmonic relationship with the divine. It arises, it emerges. And this is the same way that I've talked about presence in the past. First, we think we're present to something else, like we're becoming more aware of the situation, but that feeling, that tangible feeling of presence is what arises when we enter that state of harmonic relationship. It's the indication that the light is really cooking the different forms of light with each other, and they're bubbling forth what emerges from that. So you want to say something for the practice?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to revisit a practice that we've done before. In Ravani Ra, actually, we had this kind of threefold practice that we've shared, and she did the first part in the first half of tonight about feeling this intimate relationship with the divine, that just the feeling of love and compassion that arises. And we've done meditations before about experiencing everything as being Gabriel, everything seeking to announce itself, everything seeking to announce its divinity. And also we've done a meditation about ourselves, the nature of our being, that awakening of divinity in ourselves. We also have that desire, the divine has that desire to shine through the unique form of divinity that can only come through us. So let's jump in. So close your eyes. And let's return to the theme of tonight, which is awakening in life. And I'd like you to pick a situation going on in your life that's challenging, difficult, puzzling, or you feel stuck in, something that, as we talked about at the beginning of tonight, pulls you away from that state of being that you really want to be in, that multidimensional sense of yourself. And now try something on for size. Use that faculty of creative imagination, that creative faculty of your soul, that creative faculty that is helping to write the allegory, the story of your soul. And so if you've been stuck on a certain vantage point in this circumstance now, just allow yourself to trust that even if your perception has gotten distorted and limited temporarily, the reality is everything that's involved in this situation is a form of the divine being seeking to express itself. As many of you know, we talk about seeing that which transpires behind that which appears. We talked about Tawil being harmonic perception, and we talked about harmonic relationship. So allow yourself to open and trust that the circumstance that you're in, underneath the surface appearances, your way of relating to what's going on, whatever it is that you're in relationship with, is seeking to reveal its divinity to you, its unique divinity to you. And you're just allowing that to happen. You don't make it happen. It's not a matter of will. It's the simplest thing in the world. You're just opening to it. What could be easier than opening to what actually is? And just feel the immediate shift that takes place. You may feel a rush of energy in your head. And just allow that to penetrate through the levels of your being. Allow yourself to be transformed by the light that comes through the expression of divinity, the divine's gift to you. Breathe it in. Taste it, smell it, feel it. See it with your inner eye, hear it with your inner ear. It's like you're basking through every part of your being in an ocean of the divine qualities that are pouring forth through everything that's in this situation, in this awakened world of your soul. And there's the feeling that your cup is so filled to overflowing, you can't help but share the bounty of this and making it available to whoever may be in need of it. And as you continue to experience this, because we have the capability of modulating our consciousness and directing it to wherever we want, shift your consciousness to the whole external circumstance that you started with, and everything in that situation now perceiving you. And we'll do the flip side of what we've been experiencing now. Everything in that circumstance, every person, even inanimate objects, atoms, molecules, microscopic organisms, are all partaking in the unique divinity that's shining forth through you, that can only come through you, in the uniqueness of the divinity shining out from your being. And feeling the blessings that are now being received by everything and everywhere from your essential self that is vaster than the universe. Feel the revelations now that take place in everything in this circumstance that are made possible by this unique form of divine light that pours forth from your being, light upon light. And what we've been calling backstage or the backstory, all of this is a part of the allegory of the divine being, God's story. God's story emerging through every name and form. Every desire, every blessing, ever unfolding. And may we each awaken more and more to that perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, and form the embodiment of the messenger of which each of us is an essential part. The answer to the cry of humanity. Amen.